Hello to the folks tuning in from hopefully around the world. So let me think. I think it was about 17 years ago, I walked into in Spring Green, walked into the Red Square studio. Yeah, the show, and there was a wonderful show there. And it was the students from Taliesin, it was their John Lautner's shelter at Taliesin. And the show was absolutely terrific. And the Red Square event space was really nice. And I found out that Ryan had a huge part in both of them. And then years later, a friend of ours was doing one of these presentations and he did a terrific job. And he showed me his notes later. And I said, wow, that is really terrific. That's a great set of notes. He said, oh yeah, that all came from Ryan. So Ryan has been someone that I have noticed everything he does is of high quality, and it's shockingly great quality. It's things that you ask, oh my gosh, who had something to do with this? And so I'm going to let Ryan tell you what he's doing out at Taliesin right now, but I want to just express my gratitude for everything that you've done out there and the high quality that you've always brought. And so you're in for a treat tonight. Everybody, Ryan Hewson.
Very much. Good evening. Thank you, Josh, for that interview, introduction. That's the right word. Yeah, so my name is Ryan Hewson, as you heard, and I hope that I will not disappoint Josh or any of you. And I have been at Taliesin for 18 years, 3 years as a student from 2005 to 2008, and then I've worked in the preservation for 15 years. I am now the Director of Preservation at Taliesin for the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. And I sort of got that position starting at the low end of the pole. And as people either retired or left the organization, making my way up there. So really honored to, one of the things that I always say about Taliesin is I believe that it has given me far more than I will ever be able to give it. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead, and in this talk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with a little bit of history about the people, the landscape, and the different buildings at Taliesin, obviously, because that's how I need to approach my work, and I think it sets a really good base. Then we're going to talk about 3 projects that we're working on right now. And 2 of them, one is the Hillside Theater, one is the Pond and Dam, and the third is one that is starting, which is the South Wing, which has to deal with Mr. Wright's bedroom. If you're familiar, Mr. Wright's bedroom, garden room, plunge pool terrace. Don't worry, I do actually have images. This won't be an interpretive dance, unless you want it to be. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some other ways that you can engage with Taliesin and some other things that are going on out there, because there's always things going on. So I'm going to grab this clicker here. And so I started with then and now, because I think that Taliesin has always been about change and will always be about change. And that's one of the key things about this. Now, you might ask yourself, why would I start with this image? Well, there's a couple reasons. This is actually in the little kitchen at Taliesin. And one reason that I do this is because I know everybody likes to see the back of house. This is what it looks like. Pretty nice back of house. The other thing, a few things that we can see in this picture up here, this skylight here, as they often talk about Wright, about Taliesin being Wright's laboratory. There's actually a Western Union telegram from Wright to Wes Peters, his son-in-law, talking about how he wanted the effect of the skylight in the Guggenheim to be like the one in the little kitchen. So that's one of those few. The other things are conjecture based on timing, but that's one of the few things that we have documented evidence about that happening and being translated to another building. This window here, in true Taliesin fashion, was actually repurposed from another place, was moved from a higher area down to here. This table right here is actually the table that Mr. and Mrs. Wright would eat breakfast on. If you've been to the living room, it'd be in the corner off of the pier. So that's what that table would be wheeled out for that. And then finally, this little splash of door that you see here is approximately where the entrance to Taliesin 1 was. So I also show you this image just to show you how much information is just in this little bit that I just showed you. And imagine that all of this is happening over a large property and building. And so I think for those of you in the audience, you probably know we're in Madison. I hope you do. We're definitely in Madison. For those that's joining by Zoom, we're in Madison, and we're going to be talking more specifically about Spring Green, where Taliesin is located. And then this shape here is an outline of the driftless area, which is what creates the unique topography that Taliesin is built on. And we'll zoom in a little closer here. And this is actually the property and the surrounding buildings. So we have the mighty Wisconsin River, of course. I'm going to start with Taliesin. Taliesin is here, and that is Taliesin is Welsh for shining brow. It was also the name of the bard in King Arthur's court who sang of the glories of fine arts. On the other end of the property is Hillside, which was actually one of his early commissions by his aunt, started as an early commission by his aunts who ran the Hillside Homeschool here, which was a co-educational boarding school, which was in reaction to sort of the, at the time, the institutionalization of learning, and the reaction was, no, we're going to learn by doing. And those that are familiar with Taliesin might have heard that before. So we'll see where that ends up. And then, of course, midway between Taliesin and Hillside is Midway Barn, which is a barn that Wright designed and worked on. We've been doing a lot of study on that with the University of Pennsylvania Stuart Wetzelheim School of Design, which is their preservation arm. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too. But essentially, when we started looking at this, we had thought there were about 4 or 5 phases of construction. And through their research, it turns out they're probably closer to 19 larger phases of construction. Then we have Romeo and Juliet, which was also designed for his aunts. That was to pump water to Hillside. Then Tanny Dairy, which was designed for his sister, Jane, and that's Welsh for under the oaks. And then notably on this other side, we have what's known as the Thomas Lloyd Jones farm. And that was actually one of his uncle's farms, Thomas Lloyd Jones. If you have read the autobiography, it's not the uncle that he spent the summers with and they added tired to tired with. However, Thomas was the family carpenter. So it's reasonable to assume they might have had some conversations. And that's where we run our preservation activities out of. Finally, we have Unity Chapel here. That was the family chapel that was built in the 1880s. And we'll take a look at that. And last but certainly not least is the Frank Lloyd Wright Visitor Center, which was at one time the Spring Green restaurant. There's many things. We'll talk a little bit about that. But that's where if you come out to visit us and are going to take a tour or attend a program, that's where your journey is going to start. It has a beautiful view of the Wisconsin River. And so and then this road that's running down here is 23. So that gives you a little idea of where we're at. In total, it's about an 800-acre estate. 200 of that is approximately this farm. So it's really about 600 acres. 600 acres there, the historic core, and about 80,000 square feet of building total. I don't like saying that too much because it's a lot. And so this is a picture of all the Lloyd Joneses. This is the family that came over from Wales. They ultimately settled in Spring Green. I'm going to just highlight a few figures here. This is his grandfather, Richard. The empty chair is for his grandmother, Molly, who had died. And then right here is Frank Lloyd Wright himself. Contrary to all the pictures you see, he was not actually a 50-year-old man his whole life. He actually did go through boyhood. On his knee is his younger sister, Maggie Nell, and up above him is Jane, who would go on to design Tanny Dairy for. Here we have William Carey Wright, and then Anna Lloyd Wright. And this is, where are you? This is Thomas here of Thomas Lloyd Jones farm. So this is the whole clan. There were 10 aunts and uncles, all very progressive, came over here obviously to improve their lot and be able to practice their Unitarian faith. So Wright is certainly not a black sheep of this family. It's a very progressive family into education. His mother was also an educator, as well as his two of his aunts, Jane and Nell. In fact, this is Jane and Nell, and it went out of my head which one is which. So in this particular picture, but it's Jane and Nell, who will commission Wright to design the Hillside Homeschool and Romeo and Juliet. Extremely helpful to architects. If a lot of architects get their start through having family members that believe in them and give them these commissions here. And so that's, and then when we talk about Hillside, if you're familiar, this picture is actually where Hillside will be. Hillside is going to end up, the hillside that you visit now, I think is going to end up being about here-ish. But this is what, we would call their home farm. This was, and so the Hillside Homeschool was really started in the home farm of Richard and Molly, and then starts to get these buildings added. And so over time, as Wright acquires the property, these buildings were either allowed to fall down or taken down by him. And so you can see certainly a plethora of buildings, over 20 buildings were there. You can see some unique, we have a round barn, we have a unique windmill already. There's some unique features going on here, but just trying to give you a sense of what it looked like before this all happened. And then this is really interesting. This is a picture of the Welsh Hills that are on the opposite side of Taliesin. That's what Wright called them. And this particular picture was taken by Frank Lloyd Wright himself in the 1900s. And so that's sort of interesting, and it shows how different if you drive out there now. Quite a few more trees, even though we've done some prairie clearing, but it shows you the land that he came to, he knew as a boy, and then takes these pictures. And then this is actually right here. This is the hill that Taliesin will be built on. And so we're standing looking from a distance. So this gives you an idea. I believe this is probably shocks of wheat or corn that are going on here. I'm not quite sure. But just to give you an idea of what the valley looked like. And that view is approximately from where Tanny Dairy is today. And so then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about each of the buildings, just so I don't lose you, which I might. I'm going to start each building. I'm going through the buildings chronologically when they appear. And then once I hit a building, we're going to follow that building all the way through. So for instance, we're going to hit Hillside in 1902, but we're going to go all the way to 1959. So that's how this chronology is going to come. This is UDD Chapel. It was commissioned by Wright's uncle, Jenkin Lloyd Jones, who was a Unitarian minister, notably of All Souls Church in Chicago. And Joseph Silsby was the architect, and Wright worked for him as a draftsman before he worked for Sullivan. And you can see it's just a really beautiful country church. It's done in the shingle style here. And then, of course, this stonework here that we'll see often at Taliesin was done by Welsh stonemasons as well. Some that would go on to work with Wright at Hillside and Taliesin. And then just a really very simple floor plan. Of course, this is the sanctuary here. Can be divided into two spaces. There's the vestibule, and then you're looking at the porch here. And then there's a little kitchen kind of setup area, and it maintains that same character. This is 1886 that this is built, and it's still there today. You can certainly go down Highway T and visit the outside of it, and there's a family graveyard is there as well. And I'm happy to report the Lloyd Joneses are alive and doing very well. There's a few still in the valley, and the last reunion they had last year brought 150 of them from all over the world. So we're really happy to still have that family around it and being involved in this chapel as well. And this is a sketch by Frank Lloyd Wright of that chapel. His signature is right there. And not known, I don't know if this was done before the building was completed or afterwards. It just gives you an idea, and kind of, I think it's kind of interesting sometimes to see the earlier things that Wright is up to. So I tried to dig into the vault a little bit for people. Now we have Romeo and Juliet. This is 1896. And so this is, if you've seen Romeo and Juliet now, this is how it was originally clad, again, sort of in that shingle style, and now it's changed. And then you can see that I got lost in this picture. And this is hillside here. And then this is Romeo and Juliet here, and it is very definitely the tree that escaped the forest. I would argue that it's probably Wright's first skyscraper. It stands about 60 feet tall. And it certainly does. Its original intention was to be strapped to the bedrock below there, that natural outcrop, sort of like a vertical cantilever, right? Just like a tree is a vertical cantilever with its taproot going down. And then the floor plan of that is where Romeo and Juliet get their name. Romeo is this diamond shape here, and he's facing so that he directs the wind around them. And then Juliet is this octagon or circle shape, and she is the stable shape that helps keep them up. So they work together, they work in tandem to keep the building up. And just for an idea of scale, at this time you could buy a mail order windmill, $300, no problem. There it is. This cost $900. So the uncles, of course, being practical farmers, are sort of think the ants are a little crazy for spending this amount of money on young Wright, you know, a little unproven. And so the legend is that they would go outside on their porches after every storm to see if Romeo and Juliet had fallen down. And in fact, it had not. And in fact, it outlived them all. It was completely rebuilt in the 1990s. And then next, we'll talk a little bit about Hillside. This is Hillside here. So we have, this is the assembly hall. These were classrooms, also classrooms down here. And then we have the theater and gymnasium on this farther end. And then this is another building that was used as a dormitory that was often Wright edited that out of the photos. And in fact, there's a woman in our audience, Kieran Murphy, who was one of the first people that found an image like this that showed this and how that connected. So quite interesting. And then of course, Romeo and Juliet in the background. And then the Hillside Homeschool, I'm gonna go back there just a second. The Hillside Homeschool closes in 1915. And then largely this large building largely lays empty, even though they try to find ways to use it. Wright acquires it at some point in the some point in those intervening years, and most likely he paid his aunts $1 and promised that it would be that he would keep it as an educational institution. Not sure how true that is, but I do know that Wright said, "Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story." And so that's always a little bit unhelpful when you're trying to search for history. So then that does happen, because in 1932, Wright forms the Taliesin Fellowship with his wife, Olga Vanna. So this is Frank Lloyd Wright and his wife, Olga Vanna. It's actually Wes, who I was talking about earlier, and I believe this is their daughter, Ivana. But they're sitting with the fellowship in the dining room. And these next few images are meant to kind of give you a real brief snapshot of what that looked like. So they're dressed up, they're sitting in the dining room. I think they're probably having a deep and meaningful conversation there. And then on the other side, you see them working on the building. A little unclear whether they're taking the building apart or putting it back together. But you can see them working on that. If there's any OSHA inspectors in the room, we don't do that. We don't do it like that anymore. And then finally, of course, we see them in the great drafting studio, all sitting around Wright, learning from Wright. And I think I just find it really interesting, the amount of diversity that we see in literally the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. These people are hearing about Wright internationally, even at that time, which is I find to be fairly impressive. And so there's a really vibrant community. There were upwards of 70 to 100 people living there. And so that's a little bit about the fellowship, and really critical to realizing all the buildings at Taliesin, right? And then also the sister site, which I'm not going to talk about very much, which is Taliesin West, that's in Scottsdale. Put that in your pocket to visit in the winter. don't want to go there now, way too hot. Rattlesnakes are out too. And that was his winter camp. That's how you solve your heating and cooling problem. You just go across the country. One way. And then this is actually them building the drafting studio. So where that building was, you saw in the other picture, it was here, and then here they are actually physically constructing the drafting studio, which they started in the 1930s and had completed by the 40s. So obviously, I think Wright was able to think really far outside the box. I mean, he started building a 5,000 square foot drafting studio in the middle of the Great Depression, which I think takes a lot of vision, and you can certainly visit that space today. And then, unfortunately, tragically at Hillside, there was a fire. It was I know it as a leaf fire that got out of control, and you can see that it burned that second story there. It burns this gym and studio theater area. Remarkably, it does not burn this foyer that was built in the 1940s. So the building used to end here, and then this foyer is here. We're going to talk a little bit more about Hillside Theater later on in the presentation. And then, of course, true to form, this is, I think, 1953, and he's already started to reimagine it and rebuild it into the Hillside Theater that we know today. So here they are working to rebuild it. And then over here is a drawing of that new theater. And you can see critically for him, he cranks the box so that, so he cranks it so you have seating on either end, and then you have the stage. So basically everybody's looking right into the stage, and you're looking right out at them. And it's about 100-seat theater is what results, and it's truly a theater at this point. Back at some points, they showed a lot of movies. Wright was an avid movie, love movies. And in fact, there was a point where you could pay 5 cents and watch a movie there and get a cup of coffee. I don't think we can offer that anymore, but not at that price point anyways. And so that's kind of the story of Hillside, right? There's a lot more to learn, but gives us a little brush. And then we have Tanny Dairy. This is a more recent picture. Tanny Dairy, which is Welsh, as I said, Welsh for under the oaks. The floor plan of this was designed after the $5,000 fireproof house. And some of you are probably saying, well, this guy doesn't know very much because that's wood. Well, it turns out that Big Sister got what Big Sister wanted. She wanted wood shingling, and so that's how that was done. If you are ever interested and want to see a more true realization of that fireproof house done in stucco, there's one in Mason City, Iowa that's tourable, and it's I always get this mixed up. It's either the Stockton or the Stockman house. And another notable feature of this house, besides being built for his sister, was that no furniture was ever designed for this house. So there's no Wright furniture for this house. And they had come to help with the Hillside home, with the Hillside homeschool, help with the running of that. And so that's Tanny Dairy, and it's about a 4,000 square foot house. It's got 4 bedrooms up top, living room, dining room, kitchen. And then down below, there's a basement that can support events and things like that. The Porters had events. They were friendly with the fellowship, even though it's sort of like what we would know as a standalone farmette. They had their own windmill, mail order. Didn't get Brother to design that one. Don't know what that's about, but he got the house, so that's the biggest thing. And so they had a partnership, and Wright acquires this property in the early 1950s from them. And this is the building that is completely restored on the property, and is now on a maintenance footprint, right? Because once we're done preserving things, doesn't mean we're done. We get to walk away from it. It means we have to keep the maintenance up so we don't have to do so much heavy lifting later. And then finally, you get to Taliesin. Taliesin, of course, this is Taliesin 1, first built in 1911. And then I can show you, then there was a terrible tragedy in 1914. This is a shot from that fire, from the damage that fire caused. You can see it's quite extensive. And then, of course, in a real show of will, basically Wright pushes all those ashes down. And I can verify this for you because I've dug through them. right down on the hill, and then starts building Taliesin 2. And so this is Taliesin 2. And you can see we're starting to get a little bit bigger. We still got the same aspect going on. And then there's another fire. This was an electrical fire, happened in 1924. Again, the residence wing burns. And so we have what we call Taliesin 3, rises out of those ashes. You can see it continues to get bigger. It continues the same language, but it does keep getting bigger. And this graphic is meant to kind of help you see that because, so Taliesin 1, approximately 10,000 square foot building. Taliesin 3 is an approximately 30,000 square foot building, how big it got over time. If you're familiar with Taliesin, but essentially what happened is this line marks the end of the fires. All the fires burned this way, burning the residence wing, both of them. There were multiple other smaller fires that happened. Learning by doing electrical might not be the best way to learn. So that gives you a kind of a graphical picture of that, and also sort of dispels this notion, well, it's easy to call it Taliesin 1, 2, and 3. That's not really true, because you can see there's parts of Taliesin 1 and 2 and 3 all intertwined in each other. Really, the biggest part that was impacted by these fires was here. And then just to show you, just to give you a brief idea, and these are different pictures of the living room. So this is from Taliesin 1 period, Taliesin 2, and Taliesin 3. And I think the thing that's most important to notice here is that it's always changing, but it's always Taliesin, right? It's always carrying that same language. It's opening up, it's getting bigger, but you get an idea, and this is happening throughout this whole building. Basically, it's getting bigger, it's getting changed, but it always maintains this character of Taliesin. And then we come to Midway Barn. Probably the oldest structure on the property is actually right here. This was a mill house that the Lloyd Joneses had down on the creek that will later become the pond. And this was pulled up there on block and tackle, and then got what I call a Wrightification. So it got some limestone and some other things added to it. And again, you can see Midway is a rather large barn, about 20,000 square feet. And over here, this feature here is the round, it was known as the machine shed or roundhouse, and it's designed is so you can bring a tractor in, grab an implement, and go out, or drop an implement, grab an implement. So that was the idea behind that design. The color picture over there on the right, you can see them painting those A-frame. The apprentices are painting those A-frame structures, and those are actually pig houses. So even the pigs at Taliesin got an architecturally designed house. And this is the back of that machine shed. And this was lovingly referred to as Pork Alley. And so, and then we'll see something here. If you've seen Midway, this roof is not extant anymore. And you can see how meaningful it is to this architecture to have that come down. I just invite you to see how that sweeps down and becomes part of the landscape. And then, of course, those pig boxes then extend that language and dot it out through the landscape, kind of extending the language of this barn and making what isn't, don't tell it I said it, but what isn't really a necessarily great hill look really pretty gorgeous. And we've been really happy to do. This is one of the buildings that's in need of the most work on the property, quite honestly. It's hard when your two other sisters are Taliesin and Hillside. Hard to imagine this is the ugly sister, but a little bit. But we're definitely getting traction there, and happy to do more research and starting to come up with that planning. So that's off in our future. I'm not going to talk about that too much, but it's a great picture, I think, of that. Illustrates how it should look and why and to me illustrates why it's so important to restore that roof, why some of these things are important to be restored for the appearance and how they function. Then we have the what we now know as the Frank Lloyd Wright Visitor Center. Wright, it actually started with Wright in the early 50s. And this is sort of as far as they got, because then they ran out of money. Surprise, surprise. And then a gentleman named William Keelan picked it up with Taliesin Associated Architects, and it was finished out as a supper club. And with everybody being in Wisconsin, I think, talking about people who are joining from different places, basically a fancy place to eat. And of course, we can see that it's really groovy. Got the shag carpeting, just everything. And it was really great. I hear great stories about it. I think it was really the place to go and to be in the 60s and 70s for sure in Spring Green and be seen. And then fortunately, and then this is a picture of it shortly after it was completed. And then fortunately, when Taliesin preservation was started, they were able to acquire this building and it became the Frank Lloyd Wright Visitor Center. So you still enter in down here. And then over here where the bar was is a gift shop, which is visible anytime. And then the dining room is still over here. This is where the bus picks you up for your tour. So it obviously you can see too, it has a great view of the Wisconsin River. So I find it interesting that I think from what I've read and understand, Wright had started this project with the idea of it being a welcome center to the valley, probably to entertain clients, things like that. Welcome center to Taliesin. Looks like he ended up being pretty right. It took a little while to get there, probably about 40 years more than he thought it would take, but did get there. So definitely invite you to visit that building. And then as we started with the landscape, I kind of want to just end with the landscape because I think in terms of our little history lesson here, it's so important to Wright. This is the landscape that he grew up with as a boy. So really, in large part, this whole property that I'm showing you is cliff notes of his life, right? Because he's a young boy in this valley rambling around, and I think we all have memories of childhood and special places that stick out for us, and he's able to return to it and build on it. And then a draftsman at Unity Chapel, and then all the way a young architect, and all the way up to a very accomplished and noted architect up to up until his death and working on it. So I think that's pretty rare to have that. Really, this is almost his whole career is here, and you can find pieces of it here. This particular picture, again, we see the Wisconsin, and then you can see the contour farming, of which he was an early proponent. And you can also see talking to one of the farmers that has worked here, he talked about it when we were talking about doing this contour farming. Obviously better for the land because you're going with the topography. And he mentioned that it was like painting with a tractor. And there definitely is an aesthetic. While I think that Wright was concerned with the soil and all that stuff, I think there was also very much an aesthetic concern here, because we can change the colors, we can have this whole, we can highlight how the land works. So there's definitely that definitely drives decisions at Taliesin. And then finally, just in another brief fashion, these are three versions of the landscape, right? This is from the 50s. This is the drawing that's on the table, right? This is where you're trying to get to. Although I'm not quite sure how a tractor is supposed to turn around in a complete circle, but that's a problem for another day. And then over here, this is a picture of it in an aerial photo from 1955. So you can see it largely is very similar. And then finally over here, this is a picture from 2000s, which I'm loath to admit is over 20 years old now. So we're just going to ignore that happened. We're going to say that was 2 years ago. But you can see that there's still quite a bit of the historic features of the property intact and extant. To just give you an idea of what the vision was, what was achieved, and what we are working with now and what we're working to bring back as well. So that concludes a little bit about the history, just kind of set us up with how many buildings there are. There's a few other facts in there I didn't give, but maybe you'll just have to have me back again. This is the Hillside Theater restoration. This is prior to the restoration project we're currently working on. This is the Hillside Theater curtain, which you may have heard of. It's abstraction of River Valley. This is the river. We have Taliesin up there, and then we have the hill. Music notes as well. This was done from a design that Wright had done and had on his desk. The apprentices picked it up, did some modifications, and created this out of yarn and felt, and gold lame down at the bottom. And then this very bespoke dye, which is known as Nest Cafe coffee. So up here, you don't quite see it, but apparently after it was done, Wright saw it and there's a little too light up here. So he used Nest Cafe to turn it a little bit more brown. So if you spill coffee on your white shirt in the morning, just channeling Frank Lloyd Wright wasn't an accident. And this was actually given to Frank Lloyd Wright by the fellowship in the 50s as a birthday present. Wow, what a present. And so it's a really beautiful piece, and we've had it cleaned as part of this process. And actually, we're not going to see this statue here, but another statue that's been worked on. And so as most things, we really like to try to share as much as we can. We were able, before we started this, to do to have a theater symposium in partnership with the Wisconsin Trust for Historic Preservation, UW Milwaukee. UW Milwaukee went out and scanned some beautiful local theaters in various towns, beautiful buildings. And then we were able to share this with other people who maybe are in a smaller town and are looking to restore their theater. We had some contractors out that might be of help. And these are the UW displays over here. So it was a way for us to, we want to engage the Wright world, but it was a way for us to engage the preservation world and see us as a theater, not necessarily just a Wright theater. And so that's a great chance for us to meet other individuals. This is the director of the Historic Theater League here, and this is actually the Wisconsin SHPO, who also came out with us. And we're looking forward to doing another one of these next April, which will be on Midway Barn. So it'll have to do with barn symposium and looking at those construction techniques. This is another drawing of Hillside. This is at elevation. Our work is primarily here, and then underneath in this basement. You're going to see a drawing for that. This is our drawings now. I hate to disappoint people, but I'm not doing it all in pen and paper. I have a loose idea of how that goes, but a little bit faster with the computer. And so this is the foyer here. This is the stage. And this is the basement here. The dining room is above the basement. And so these are two of our crew members here. We have a total crew of 10 people who work on the buildings and landscapes. So everybody gets 100 acres. I called the ones out the building. And this is Kirk, who is on the right, and then Kevin, who is on the left, both really talented craftsmen. And just like people before that have worked on the buildings, I owe everything to them. I mean, they're the ones that all this work and all this beautiful work that you see. I just had to give a tour of this, and they're asking me how it went. And I said, it went great. I just showed off all your work. So my job is really to keep them focused, help them, make sure we're following the right thing, but couldn't do it without them. And major gratitude to all the people who work at Taliesin. And also, as I'll point out, this is important work, but we're really grateful too for the tour guides and stewards and people who make it come alive for people on tour. Because quite frankly, if we were doing this for ourselves, we might still be entertained, but it's so much better that we have somebody to share, that we have people who can share it with other people. And I think that's where we want to get to at the end of the day. That's why we chose to work on the theater here. We were able to get a National Park Service Save America's Treasures grant. So that was very helpful in this, but it's also a way that we can bring more people to the building, right? We can bring people to experience the building. And then we also had a donor donate so that we can have a live streaming service in there, which consists of 5 cameras and audio. So we can take what is a 100-seat theater and make it an infinite seat theater. This is the basement here. These stone columns here are the originals. Storage room, green room, and a bathroom. And this is all accessible. Our goal is, to the best of our abilities, we want to make Taliesin as accessible to all audiences as is possible, given the character defining features of the building. This is what we started with. Pretty standard basement. Maybe a few more unique things. And I have to say, before when we started, we could really only invite our friends to play here because they had water that was coming through the basement. So this will allow us to bring more people. First step, got to get your shovel out. And so they dug down, our crew dug down, and we poured new footings here. And then what happens next is then off of those footings, these 2x4s come up, and then there are beams here that go across, and then over here another set of 2x4s that go onto another foundation. So essentially what we did was we built a building inside of a building so that we didn't have to impact the dining room up above. This is a basement area, so in our zoning, this has more leeway for change than the dining room up above it. Then a big component of this project here is adding HVAC. So we see that ductwork going in. We had to go with that vertical plenum as opposed to a horizontal one to save headroom. And again, that was an idea by our construction foreman. So like I said, it's a real team effort. And that system is actually going to be a VRF, which is a variable refrigerant flow. And what that means is the medium that carries the heat and cool is a refrigerant instead of water or air. And that allows us to have smaller lines, so less disturbance, and also is quieter. And then we get into the business of stick framing it out, sticking those rooms out. And then finally, we're actually further along than this. They're actually all drywalled and should be starting the final paint, I believe, tomorrow. And so what we're seeing here, and then what will happen here is that we'll be painted in the similar colors to Taliesin. We're not going to try and do full plaster or anything like that or any sand texture. So it looks like what it is something that's been added. One feature we're able to add is we will have some trim here that was actually milled from an oak tree that we had to take down on the property because it had declined. So that's a really nice story, and it makes you feel a lot better when you have to take down a 200-year-old oak tree that you can get some use out of it. And then we started working on the upper finishes here. That's just a little snapshot of that. There's quite a bit more to go, but starting to refresh all of these finishes, clean them up, kind of even things out as best as we can in some cases. All new electrical. And then this is just a little snapshot. This is underneath that light deck. And each one of these actually had, we need to take out, do a little bit of cleanup, and then all of the edges and the other cutouts were all actually in red. So that's all been restored and picked back up. So there's a lot of detail work in there and a lot of cleanup in there that people won't see, but is going to be well worth it. A lot of deep cleaning had to go on too while we're doing this work. And then this is just a sampling of outside. We had some damage to stone pavers. This is us working to take it up. And then this is here, this is the finished product here. And you can't quite see it in these photos, but this grout is actually darker. And the reason that it's darker is because it has galena in it, which is lead and sulfur. And that was for waterproofing. That wasn't a particularly unique idea to write. That did happen. In the case of where we are putting it back, we're not going to be working with lead like that. So we use masonry pigment. In this case, it's magic black. So we do multiple tests. And one thing that's very strange about masonry, very similar mixing grout and mortars. It's very similar to baking. If you've ever baked, baking, you can if you want to make that loaf of bread, it doesn't double. The math says it should, but it never works out. And it's the same for mortar, because you have you got to make the batch you're making. Because if you make a small batch and it never works. And I don't know why that is, but that's just, it's been our experience, and other preservation I've talked with experience as well. And then you sort of get a sense that it flows a little bit here. And the recipe didn't come down to us, but we do know that they poured the mortar, this grout, out of a watering can. So what you do is you go down to the hardware store, you get yourself a watering can, take the sprinkler part, throw that out, don't need that. Then you're gonna mix up your mortar and you put it in there and you pour it in between the joints to give it that poured look. What we found to be the magic is casein, it's a milk byproduct. I'm not gonna get too deep into the science, but essentially what that does is it makes a mortar set up a little bit faster and it allows it to flow. Because you can imagine maybe if we took a can full of concrete and just poured it, it'd go all over and then you got a mess. So that's what we've discovered through trial and error and discussions and things like that. So constant, I think the most important thing for us is that it's constant dialogue with the building. And you have to maintain a really good sense of hubris, because I don't believe that anybody ever operated on these buildings in bad faith. I think maybe they just didn't have the money. They didn't have the experience. So there's all those things. And there are things that seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, there's things that seemed like a good idea 50 years ago that sure aren't a good idea now. So you have to understand that and appreciate that, or at least I do. And then in another case, in order to help accessibility, this was a theater bathroom. If you're familiar, and we were able to cut in a hole through the wall to make this an accessible bathroom. Another feature, this is the end, and this is where you would enter here in the foyer here. And we were able to add this accessible path here that's done in wax polymer, which is ADA approved. It's done by the Wisconsin company has it up in Kafka granite. And so this, you can see how it kind of achieves what we're looking for. It blends in. It doesn't stick out, but will help people with mobility issues to be able to be brought there and come up and come to the theater. And then this is one of the, so another thing we were able to do is work on some of the artifacts in the theater. This is a multi-armed Guanyin, it's goddess of mercy. And here is Frank Lloyd Wright, looking pretty snazzy. There's something going on here. I don't know why. I think he looked fatter than he is, but middle age is hard on all of us. And this is the statue when he got it. Here it is, okay? Here it is after being in Taliesin for a little while. It did go, there are two of these statues, and there actually were three. The third one was lost in that hillside fire. And so this suffered extensive smoke damage. And then over here, they've just finished conserving it up at the MCC Center in, I'm not going to remember, but and so you can see they've done quite a bit. When you see these two together, you can see how much has happened. Obviously, that there's a story there to be told. So bringing it all the way back to here isn't really the story that we're looking to tell. There's also cost associated with that too. But I mean, it is the story of its life there and its time there. And so they did some careful infill, and it's hard to see from there, but you can see just here, you can see how much detail is coming back out. And we're really excited to welcome those home, and we'll actually be welcoming them home this next Tuesday. So that's fairly exciting for us. And this was through a carpenter grant, so we were able, now that we're able to provide a good climate in the theater, we were able to then get other grantors and other donors interested, because they could see where we were, they could see where it was going. And then finally, with the just end with the Hillside Theater curtain. We have a National Endowment for the Arts grant to provide protective curtains for this. So they'll have one in the front and back, and a new track and all new pulley mechanisms, so it pulls smoother. The protective curtain will allow less dust and things to get in it. And right now the system is basically two giant socks that we put them in during the winter, which is good, but this will be better because it'll require less bunching, and it'll be easier for people to operate, because the decision was made that this is a really integral part to, and I guess that's a good point just to point out that there's a lot of okay, I got to move fast. All right, so pond and dam. Sorry, I'm going to eat into the question thing. I can't get into that. So we're working on the pond and dam. That's been a multi-year project. We have a low hazard dam. And so in working with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, which I've really appreciated all their help in working through, which is an other than standard feature. We had an inspection of our dam done and there were some repairs needed. And so we poured this flow fill here to help reduce scour needs. There's another image of that dam there. The pond is drawn down now. We have one seep hole that we fixed the scour, which is where it goes underneath the dam, and then it decided to move over on us. So that's the last piece we have to correct there. And then we are also working on finishing up a permit to dredge the pond, which will make it look more like the historic pond that we see here and give it a slope that's more 6-to-1, so there'll be more room for emergent vegetation. Finally, at the south wing restoration, and this is what it encompasses. And we are just starting on this. It's going to be a year-long planning process. We're working on getting our structural engineering, our understanding of soils underneath us, what we're bearing on, and then also doing sampling of the plaster and the woodwork and all that, building science. And some other initiatives, as I mentioned, we're working with the University of Pennsylvania on the Midway Barn. This is a little example, SketchUp model, if you're familiar, three-dimensional model taken, made from scans. And then we are also University of Madison Engineering. And then finally, we have the Lowry Creek Watershed Initiative, which is the creek that actually makes our pond and our neighbors. I don't know what that was about, I guess. And then just a brief bit on the licensing is another way we try to reach out and engage people. You get an idea of just the sheer number of designs that Wright would participated in and we have access to. So there's definitely inspiration from the archives. You can see some various products here. And then of course, this is a Johnson reproduction of a Johnson wax desk. And then this, these shoes over here were inspired by the colors and of Broadacre City. So you can see sometimes it's direct reproductions, and then sometimes it's inspired by to spark a new generation of designers. And then finally, we have the Taliesin Institute, and that's been started. That's to bring universities to Taliesin. Taliesin West has really started in earnest. Taliesin West. Here are the apprentices here getting stuff ready for desert masonry. And here is a group from University of Pennsylvania that actually built some of that so they could learn what that's like. And then there's some upcoming programs here. Here we see some more various students who have come and universities from all over the world and from all over the United States as well. This is just a brief list of those universities. And then these are some other professional engagement, which I guess we're all participating in right now, if you'll grant me the luxury of being called a professional. And then these are some students in, actually, these are from the University of Geneva in Switzerland. They came out to join us in Wisconsin, and we'll be looking forward to the University of Chicago coming out and joining us later this summer. Maybe the mosquitoes will be gone by then. And then finally, just one last note, visiting. This is the abstraction of Taliesin that was done by Eugene Masslink, Wright's secretary. And should you want to come out, there's a lot of ways you can come out and enjoy Taliesin. You can obviously come out on a tour. There's many tours. I invite you to go to taliesinpreservation.org for the various tours. There's other events and programs, some of which are free if you just want to see it, try to see it. So there's lots of options there. There's blog. I'd also encourage you to go to franklloydwright.org as well for more information. It's the foundation website, and you can learn more about Taliesin West and Wright's history. And then finally, very near and dear to us here in Wisconsin, there's the Frank Lloyd Wright Trail. Keep your eye out. There'll be a display in the airport, in Madison Airport. And it encompasses the various buildings in Wisconsin. And what's really great is, like I was talking about Taliesin being cliff notes of his career. Well, right here, you can go all the way from one of the bigger administrative commercial buildings he designed to a very small school in the Wyoming Valley, just a couple miles down the road from Taliesin. So definitely invite you to check out that website and tour some of the other great Wright sites. And hey, go out and see any of the historical sites. Just get outside. Let's go too. So thank you very much for your time and the extra time that I took without asking. And I'm happy to entertain any questions that people have. I think we have a mic runner. Oh, good.
Yes, we know that with the initiation of Taliesin West, that Taliesin East would often sit idle during the winter months, and I'm wondering what kind of challenges that presented for preservation, and what is the state of the property now during the winter?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, it did sit idle. I'm sure that had it's really hard to say. That had probably had some negative effects. Buildings don't really like to sit idle. There were usually one or two people that were at Taliesin kind of keeping the fires burning. Well, not really keeping the fires burning, but that was a bad one. But we're kind of keeping track of things. The state of the property now in terms of winter is Hillside has to still be completely shut down. The water has to be shut down. Tanny Dairy has been insulated, and that is open year round. We don't have to turn off any water or anything. The same thing is largely true of Taliesin. All the areas where water runs has been provided with adequate heat, so we do not have to do that anymore. Midway has to be shut down completely, but that's really its own kind of thing. That's got a lot of other issues that are going on. And so the biggest challenge for preservation, however, is in Tanny Dairy that had been insulated. So one of the bigger challenges for preservation, and one of the ones where you can maybe get close to a drop down knockout fight, is putting insulation in historic buildings and heating and cooling, because you start to add systems that never knew. Taliesin and Hillside did have radiator heating and cooling. So now, and we're here. We don't go away. I don't get to go to Arizona in the winter. We stay here in the winter. So we keep track of the buildings, keep things plowed. We'd like to offer more winter activities, but our biggest issue is with providing access to people because of the snow and the ice. We can't use salt because it destroys the limestone. It gets into the pores, and it has something like 40,000 PSI, and it recrystallizes. We had a helpful person. I should mention we have a lady who lives here who's 99 years old, Minerva Montu. She's been there since Mr. and Mrs. Wright were there. Wonderful lady. One of her helpers decided that she would salt her stone stairs. That stone was gone in one winter. So now we have wooden stairs that go on top of it with heat mats. So that's how we get around it. We use heat mats and we use sand to provide grit. But that's sort of a little bit of what it looks like in winter. Sure. Yes, there are in fact many drawings of Midway. I can't remember off the top of my head why. And the roundhouse hasn't really disappeared. If you go out there, you will see there are pieces of it left. It was actually taken down in, believe in the it would have been in the 1980s, late 1980s. And the plan was to reconstruct it the next summer. And I guess we never specified what the next summer was. So we'll just say next summer. So that's what happened. But we do have a fair amount of drawings and other information.
You mentioned the heat pumps in the theater. I'm over here. look over to your right.
Oh, thank you.
Here we are.
Thank you.
You mentioned the heat pumps in the theater. How much of the HVAC is going to be going to a lower carbon footprint like that
How much?
of the
Like
HVAC?
in terms of tonnage or?
Well, right now, what the heat sources are, I assume, producing some carbon, and the heat pumps have a lower carbon footprint if they're running on electric.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite getting the question, I guess. And
The carbon
oh,
footprint
the
of
carbon, okay,
the VRV heat pumps, mini splits, call them what you will, which run on electricity.
right.
Are those the sole heat sources over the winter, or are there other heat sources?
No, those will be those are the sole heat sources, and we're looking in the winter. We're looking to get to a band, so we're not under any illusions we're gonna make it like here. So we're looking to keep it more towards the 50-degree in the winter, so we can keep our water on and we don't have huge spikes. The specific carbon footprint question, that is a really good question, and I don't have that answer right off the top of my head.
Ryan, another question from a Zoom attendee. Is there any research underway on Wright design structures that were subsequently demolished? I'm wondering specifically about Hillside Homeschool 1 buildings from 1887.
I'm not aware of any current research. There's definitely been some research done, which points to that Zoom viewer for knowing about the Hillside Home Building 1. I didn't cover that one because it gets a little confusing. That was a shingle style building that Wright designed in 1883. And in fact, if you go to Drafting Studio, you'll see in the back, there's a cornerstone that says 1883 on it. And that's from that building. But I'm not aware of any current research being done, but there definitely has been research in the past. And I know, like, for instance, the Larkin building in Buffalo, there's a lot of interest in that, and there's been a lot of research going on for that. So there are definitely people looking into that. And for us, it's something we can do. We have lots we can do. So.
Has there been some, I'm sorry, some residences added to the property for people who work there? Have there been some apartments added on the property?
We have not added any apartments. Any of the residences that are on the property have been there since Wright's time, because remember, there are about 70 to 100 people living there. And unfortunately, those residences are more for business guests, people who are working with us. There are some, and unfortunately, I believe they're all sold out, but there are some workshops you can participate in and stay in those residences. We generally don't have apartments for people working there, because then it's one of those things where it's not fair to everybody. Everybody's want to stay. We don't have that many rooms. And so, but any of the apartments or housing that is there was there during Wright's time.
So adding something would probably compromise some of the original feel of the place too, right?
You might be talking about what was maybe the food artisan immersion program, maybe. And that was something that was started that had people come and learn how to cook, and we're working in the visitor center cafe.
I got one other question. Back
Yep.
to restoration. Is it true when you're working, like, let's say it's some of the sandstone that may have come from the Wisconsin River in the original construction of Taliesin? When you're doing restoration, sometimes you have to purposely like if you're tuck pointing, do you have to like purposely weaken the tuck pointing material so that it's not stronger than the stonework? You ever run into that?
Sorry, I just didn't quite hear you.
Oh, what I meant is, I've seen this, sometimes if you're doing restoration on very soft stone, you've got to purposely weaken the material you're adding, so it's not stronger than the original material you're working with.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that is very true. We have one other compounding factor at Taliesin. Portland cement was being invented during Wright's lifetime, and they use that to point. They use that in their stone pointing. So we have some incorrect pointing done throughout the walls as well. So we have we have some issue with that, but you are 100% right. And an example we've all seen in the world, you always want your mortar to be softer than your stone. Stone is forever, mortar is temporary. And then an example we've all seen in the world be if you've seen a brick building and you've seen like the face blown out of the brick, right? But what happened is somebody pointed it with incorrect mortar. And so when it tried to shift, it couldn't. And the only way the force could go was to blow the face off the brick. So that's the consequence of that. So we do have to be careful, but then we also have the other thing, because I've had people tell me, they're like, you got to stop using this Portland. I'm like, we didn't put it there. That wasn't us. That was done historically. But really good point. Thank you. And there was another part, just started on that point. When they did the original plaster, they would mix sand from the river, water and sand from the river. And we can't do that anymore because we can't harvest that much sand. And so we do have to find different methods of doing it, different ways of finding the right sand and things like that. So it's always a little bit of an investigative journey.
Is there a tug of war between using the materials that were available to Wright at his time versus the advances in sealants and other modern technologies?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think there are some of the technologies he used that, quite frankly, I think are better than our technologies. But there is a tension there, and there are times that we have technologies that can help us more too, right? There are things we can use. And for some reason, I'm just blanking on anything at all. But a really good example of that would be especially in drainage, right? Like underneath our paving stones, they now have different drainage mats and dimple boards and things like that that are made for plazas that we're able to use to help those surfaces drain better. So, you know, we want to smartly use things that are coming to the fore. And I'll tell you what, PEX was a game changer for us. All of a sudden, it was a lot easier to run plumbing and redo it. So I think it's worth smart consideration, right? Like, what is it? And then there's always the question. I mean, a lot of the things I'm talking about are an ideal world, and we know that the ideal world crashes into the real world that has to do with money and time. And so sometimes you have to figure that out too. So I guess I'd say there's somewhat of a tension there, but we're also open, you know, to using them smartly and wisely if we can. And there's definitely been, you know, and like I said, I'm drawing with a computer, and our guys are using, you know, they're using drills. I mean, they're using battery drills and things. So we're not. So very good question though. That's definitely always something.
Ryan, I've got some Zoom attendees who are wondering if you accept volunteers for the restoration work or research.
I would say we're working on that, but the real problem for us there is that, as I said, we're a small crew, and so it takes a long time to set up for that and make sure that it's also important to us that the volunteer has a good experience too. And so right now, the best way to volunteer at Taliesin and get your hands dirty is actually with our gardening and landscape crew. Every Thursday, they have a volunteer day. They go around to different areas of the property and work on the garden beds and stuff. And so that's if you're looking and want to get out, that's a really great opportunity. There's some other volunteer opportunities, and you'll see that at the taliesinpreservation.org website. Excuse me. So I'd say if you want to get your hands dirty at Taliesin right now, that's the best, and we're definitely trying to figure out how to bring that forward. So I appreciate people asking.
Another question about Midway, Ryan. Was there a studio for weaving or sculpture there?
Boy, we got some people who have been here before, I feel like. Not specifically sculpture, but there definitely was a clay studio in there, and it was where the horse stable was. So there definitely was that. I can't say for sure that there was or was not a sculpture studio there. That is possible. But I do know there was there were potter's wheels and things like that.
Thank you. This might be a nice question to end on, unless there are more from the live audience. What's your favorite part of Taliesin?
I knew somebody was gonna. you know, I'm gonna cop out on that, say my favorite part of Taliesin is the part I don't know about yet. And I guarantee you, there's still stuff I don't know about 18 years on. In fact, today I just learned there's a Coke bottle in a wall that is very easy to see, and I should have seen that, I don't know, 4 years ago, 10 years ago. Who never saw it? So it's hard for me to say, because there's always different parts. But I guess probably the two favorites are the living room. The living room is amazing to sit in and be a part of, and you can do that on the tour. I know it's pretty stock standard answer, but it gets the credit it gets for a reason. And then the other space that gives me chills occasionally walking through it is the drafting studio itself at Hillside, and the beauty of the light coming in. And of course, I have many fond memories there myself. But so those are some of my favorites. But man, you know, that's the best thing about Taliesin. There's a lot of things to be the favorite. Like, for instance, our natural landscape coordinator is always talking about the natural landscapes and the prairies. And he loves that. The buildings are interesting to him, but that's the way he comes into it. And so that's, I think, one of the greatest things about Taliesin. There's a lot of things, there's a lot to appreciate, and everybody can bring their own to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I highly recommend everyone to go out to Taliesin early in the summer, late in the summer, throughout the entire summer. Every time I go, I have a great time. And anybody who wants to come visit will be met this summer by a good friend of mine's daughter, who's going to be a senior in architecture at Minnesota, Anna Greshik. So you may have the honor of having a future famous architect as your tour guide. So I have great hopes for Anna. Hey, everybody, thanks for coming, and thank you, Ryan. And I'm glad you're here in the winter, because I know you take care of that place 24 hours a day. So thanks a lot, everybody.
I'm glad I'm here in the winter too, Josh. About February, I question my decision making.
Thank you. Good night.